What's going on, YouTube? This is SG1 Sports, and you're watching our college football channel. We're going to give you a very early projected record for the Nebraska Cornhuskers and preview the 2024 schedule. Before we get to 2024, let's look back at the schedule from 2023. Here was Nebraska's schedule from last season. Of course, they played Colorado in the non-conference, lost that game. At that time, everyone thought Colorado was like a top 25 team or whatever, and they wound up, of course, not finishing very well at all. But that was a tough one there, going on the road and losing that game. They played Northern Illinois, Louisiana Tech, also in the non-conference, won those games. You look at who they played out of the East. They had to play Michigan. Obviously, that was a very tough draw there. Had to play Michigan State and Maryland, so it wasn't a terrible draw. They didn't play Ohio State and Penn State, but all that's out the window now. No more divisions in the Big Ten, and of course, it's a different conference. Here is the 2024 schedule, and we'll break it down first. The non-conference, UTEP, Colorado, and Northern Iowa. So maybe even an easier non-conference schedule than what they had last year with UTEP and Northern Iowa, and then Colorado at home. I think they'll have a great chance to win that game. So not too tough of a non-conference schedule. You look at their home games, they have those three non-conference games. Then they'll play Illinois, Rutgers, UCLA, and Wisconsin. All winnable games. I mean, these are all winnable games. It's not crazy to think that Nebraska could go 7-0 in their home games this season, but they only play 4 because they play Colorado at home, because they get their big non-conference game at home. That means they'll play 4 conference games at home, and then they'll play 5 on the road. So their road games all in the Big Ten, at Purdue, at Indiana, at Ohio State, at USC, and at Iowa. And I tell you what, I mean, Purdue, Indiana, very winnable games. You look at the schedule and you can see how Nebraska could potentially have a pretty good season in 2024. So they'll start with UTEP on August 31st. That'll be a home game. Then Colorado on September 7th and Northern Iowa on the 14th. So they'll play their 3 non-conference games to start off the season. Then they will begin Big Ten play with Illinois on September 21st. Then on the road at Purdue September 28th. Follow that up with a home game against Rutgers. And then they get their first bye week after Rutgers before playing Indiana. They will play Indiana on the road. But I want to pause right there at that Indiana game. You look at UTEP, Colorado, Northern Iowa, Illinois, Purdue, Rutgers, and Indiana. These are all winnable games for Nebraska. I'm not saying they're going to win them all, but they are winnable games. Nebraska could potentially start off 7-0. If everything goes well for them, they could be 7-0 heading into that game at Ohio State. I don't know where they would be ranked because, again, it's not a very tough schedule, but they'd be in the top 25. And if they're undefeated, they'll be ranked going into a tough game at Ohio State on October 26th. It's also back-to-back road games with Indiana and Ohio State there. They'll play UCLA on November 2nd. Then they get their second bye week before going out west to play USC. So they play UCLA and USC back-to-back, but there is a bye week in between. And, again, a home game and then an away game. Then they'll play Wisconsin on the 23rd and finish things up with a road game at Iowa on November 29th, which is, of course, the Friday after Thanksgiving. That's kind of become a tradition ever since Nebraska has joined the Big Ten. So, again, you look at the first half of that schedule from UTEP to Indiana, very favorable schedule. I mean, very favorable schedule. I think it'll be tough for them, honestly, to go 7-0 just because of where Nebraska is right now, but possible. Then you look at the other 5 games, they could potentially finish 0-5 in their last 5 games. Could that possibly happen? You know, I think it was a couple of years ago with Kansas. They started off really well, and everyone was kind of getting on the hype train with Kansas. And I said, look, they could lose the rest of their games. I think that's kind of what happened. So that's the way this schedule sets up for Nebraska. Again, I'm not saying it's going to play out that way. I think UCLA, Wisconsin, and home, they've got a real shot in those games as well. And again, I'm not saying they're going to win those first 7. Very, very easily could trip up at Purdue or even at Indiana. It's Indiana team's going to be a lot better this year. But again, overall, it's a schedule for Nebraska that starts very favorable and then gets really tough in their final 5 games. As you can see, a 5-7 record for Nebraska, of course, last season. Our projection had them at 7-5. It was actually a little bit high. I predicted them to go 6-6. Athlon predicted them to go 6-6. The over/under was at 6. So the expectation really for Nebraska was 6-6, even though our projection again came out at 7-5. Not really sure why it was that high. Of course, Colorado was a lot better than we expected, but the rest of the Big Ten was really not great last year. So, I don't really know how they came out 7-5, but they did, and we'll see what the projection is this year. Again, this is the schedule, and this is the scale that we use. So if it's Under 20 or over 80, those are pretty much considered guaranteed wins. Games where I think the spread will be 17 plus points, somewhere in that range. There's nothing guaranteed in college football, of course, but those are games that teams should win or lose, pretty much guaranteed. 20 to 29, 71 to 80, those are games where I think the spread will be double digits. 10 to 16 points, maybe in that range. 30 to 39, 61 to 70, games where I think the spread will be about a touchdown. 6, 7, 8 points. And then your 50-50 games, less than that, really games that can go either way. So we start with the easy wins for Nebraska, and I think you've got UTEP and you've got Northern Iowa. So you can go ahead and count these as wins unless something crazy happens. They should be able to take care of business in both of these matchups, both at home and against really inferior opponents. So let's go now to the games where I think they'll be underdogs by about a touchdown. So we got USC and we've got Iowa. I do think Nebraska will be, again, about a touchdown underdog. If you watched our Iowa video, I had that as a 50-50 game in that video, and that was just a mistake by me. I got my tiers wrong or something. I don't really know what happened there, but I do have Iowa in a tier above Nebraska, plus playing at home. That's why that game should be in the yellow. It's possible that I was just looking at the rivalry. I don't know, but Nebraska there, I'm not saying they can't win that game. They absolutely can beat Iowa, but I do think they will be about a 6 or 7 point underdog. And same thing with USC. USC is kind of a tough one to figure out, but it is on the road, and we know about that offense that they should have. Well, their defense being good, who knows? But I think Nebraska will be underdogs in both of those games. And then I think Ohio State, I think they're going to be big underdogs in this game. As good as the Buckeyes are going to be, plus the game being on the road, I just don't see Nebraska really having a chance in that game. That's the only game on the schedule, though, that I would say, Nebraska really has no chance to win. I think every other game they at least have a chance. And so you look at, that's it. We're at the end here. Colorado, Illinois, Purdue, Rutgers, Indiana, UCLA, and Wisconsin. These are all 50-50 games. These are all games that could go either way. Again, games where I think the spread will be less than 6 points. Colorado's a home game. I know they beat them last year. I think Nebraska should be a little bit improved this year, and I think they'll probably be favored by a field goal in that game. Illinois, I think they'll probably be favored by 4 or 5 points in that game. Purdue, that's basically a pick 'em. Rutgers, I think, is basically a pick 'em. Indiana, I really have this feeling that Indiana's going to be a lot better, but with the coaching change and everything, but we'll see. Right now I'd say probably Nebraska will be favored by about a field goal. UCLA, because it's at home, probably favor Nebraska in that one by about a field goal. And then Wisconsin, probably going to favor the Badgers in that one, even though it is at Nebraska. But again, these are all very, very winnable games. These are all games that could go either way for Nebraska. And when you look at how the season could go, if they lose to Ohio State, USC, and Iowa, there's not a ton of room for error in these 50-50 games. If they go 3-4 in the 50-50 games and lose those other 3, they're not going to make a bowl game. So they've got to at least have a winning record in these 50-50 games, go at least 4-3, or pull off an upset against, say, USC or Iowa. But when you average everything out, you get the projection for Nebraska. It does come out to 6-6. So a 6-6 projection. Again, if they were to lose those 3 games, the projection would say they're going to go 4-3 in the 50-50 games, or maybe 3-4 in the 50-50 games and pull off an upset at USC or Iowa. However you want to get there, the projection does put us at 6-6. So a bowl game for Nebraska. I think there's potential to do a lot better than that. I don't think they're going to do much worse. I think 5-7 is possible. Maybe miss a bowl game again, but I'd say 7-5 is more likely than 5-7. 6-6 right there in the middle. That's the projection that we get with our formula. What do you guys think about Nebraska? Do you agree, disagree? Where do you think this record should be projected at? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below.